Jacob Lawson never liked being called a tech mogul, even if that's what most headlines labeled him. At 34 years old, he had built and sold 2 software companies, made more than enough money to retire 3 times over, and still chose to live in a modest craftsman house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. He shopped at local co-ops, drove an old but reliable sedan, and refused to wear anything that looked remotely designer. For Jacob, authenticity wasn't just a buzzword, it was a principle. The one thing Jacob cherished more than his code or his quiet life was Hannah Myers. A school counselor with an infectious laugh and a disarming sincerity, Hannah wasn't impressed by wealth or status. When they first met at a mutual friend's holiday party, she didn't even know who he was. She asked him what he did for a living, and when he muttered something vague about working in tech, she nodded and moved on. It was, Jacob would later say, the moment he knew she was different. Over 2 years, they built a life full of small joys. Morning coffee rituals. Board game nights. Walks through Volunteer Park. Hannah kept him grounded, reminded him of the world beyond server loads and product launches. She had a way of cutting through noise, both in her professional and personal life, that Jacob found both comforting and rare. So when he decided to propose, he did it without fanfare, just the 2 of them on a foggy beach in Oregon, with a ring hidden in his coat pocket and a heart pounding louder than the waves. She said yes. Through tears, laughter, and disbelief, she said yes. Now, nearly 6 months later, Jacob wanted to celebrate their anniversary, not the date of their engagement, but the moment it all began. He wanted something meaningful, something that would make her laugh and maybe tear up again. Jewelry wouldn't do it. A vacation seemed too grand. What Jacob envisioned was more personal, more intimate, an experience. So he came up with a plan. Hannah had scheduled a weekend getaway with her closest friends, a cabin trip near Mount Rainier, filled with wine, gossip, and, as she put it, absolutely no reception. Jacob knew she'd be flying back into Seattle on Sunday afternoon. That's when inspiration struck. What if he posed as her Uber driver, picked her up without her realizing, and whisked her away to a surprise anniversary dinner? It sounded silly. Ridiculous, even. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt perfect. He imagined her laughter as she recognized him mid-ride, the delight in her voice, the shock on her face. It wasn't about tricking her, it was about creating a story they'd tell forever. He looped in his friend Marcus, who had a legitimate Uber driver account. Marcus agreed to let him borrow his profile for a few hours. Jacob rented a plain gray Corolla, the kind of car you'd never look at twice, and set up a dummy phone with Marcus's login. On Sunday morning, he donned a nondescript baseball cap, a pair of oversized sunglasses, and a hoodie zipped up to his chin. In the mirror, he looked like someone trying very hard not to look like himself. He parked at the arrivals lot at SeaTac, nervously checking the app. The airport was its usual chaos, horns blaring, families reuniting, tired travelers shuffling in all directions. His stomach fluttered. He hadn't felt this kind of anticipation since launching his first company. But this wasn't a pitch meeting or a product demo. This was Hannah. The notification buzzed. A new ride request. Hannah Myers. He inhaled sharply. There it was. Her name, her face, the little dot on the map moving toward the pickup point. It was happening. His plan was working. He tapped to accept. As the seconds ticked by, he spotted her walking with her best friend, Chloe, a petite brunette with a sharp tongue and a fierce loyalty to Hannah. They wheeled matching carry-ons, deep in conversation, their heads close together. Jacob kept his eyes on the road, pretending to check his mirrors, heart hammering. The car door opened. Laughter spilled in. This guy looks serious, Chloe joked as she climbed into the back seat. Hope he doesn't mind girl talk. I'm too tired to care, Hannah replied, settling in. Let's just get home. Jacob adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, his fingers trembling. Uber for Hannah, he asked, deepening his voice just enough. Yep, she said. Thanks. As he pulled away from the curb, Hannah and Chloe resumed their conversation without hesitation, as if he weren't there at all. They didn't recognize him. Not his voice, not his posture, not the eyes behind the sunglasses. Jacob fought the urge to smile. For now, the plan was working flawlessly. But then Hannah said something that made his stomach turn. "I don't know, Chloe," she murmured. "Lately, I've just been feeling weird about everything." Jacob's smile faded. Chloe leaned closer. "Weird how?" And just like that, the tone of the ride shifted. Jacob focused on the road ahead, gripping the wheel a little tighter, trying not to betray the sudden dread settling in his chest. He had started this drive expecting surprise and laughter. Instead, he was about to hear something he never saw coming. Jacob kept his gaze locked on the road, doing his best to steady his breathing. The weight of Hannah's words from the back seat pressed heavily on his chest, but he forced himself to remain silent. He couldn't reveal himself, not yet. He had to let the scene unfold naturally, no matter how much it hurt. This was the moment he had engineered, after all, thinking it would bring joy. Now it was testing the very core of his patience and composure. Hannah sighed behind him. "It's not that I don't love him," she said quietly, the words tumbling out with a nervous edge. "I do. God, I do. But sometimes it feels like I'm just a supporting character in his life. Like I've stepped into a story that already had its plot written and I'm just reacting." Chloe shifted in her seat. "That's a heavy thing to say." "I know," Hannah replied. "And maybe it sounds dramatic. But lately, everything feels off. Like, when we talk about the wedding or the future, it's all planned already. His ideas. His timeline. His world. I just nod and go along with it, but a part of me is screaming, where am I in all this?" Jacob gripped the wheel tighter. He hadn't realized she felt so overshadowed. He thought he'd given her space, made decisions together. But from her voice, from her doubt, he was starting to wonder if he had missed something entirely. "You've never said that before," Chloe responded cautiously. "You always seemed happy." "I am happy, or at least I thought I was," Hannah murmured. "But then sometimes I wonder if I've just convinced myself to be. Jacob is so good. Too good, maybe. He never loses his temper, never forgets anything, always has these big romantic gestures planned. And it's not fake. That's just who he is. But it makes me feel like I'm playing catch-up all the time. Like I'm the one with all the doubts and flaws while he's just this flawless partner. It's exhausting." Jacob felt like the air in the car was thinning. The surprise he had been so proud of planning now seemed painfully ironic. He had wanted to create a moment that would strengthen their bond. Instead, he was learning that the woman he loved felt like she was slipping out of it. "Okay, but are we talking cold feet, or like, I need to rethink this relationship kind of thing?" Chloe asked, her voice sharper now. Hannah hesitated. The pause was long enough for Jacob's heart to begin pounding again. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I had lunch with Chris last week." Jacob's body tensed. Chloe's voice dropped an octave. "Chris? Chris? Your ex?" "It wasn't like that," Hannah said quickly. "It wasn't a date. We just talked. He reached out after he heard about the engagement. I didn't plan it, but I said yes. I thought maybe it would help me sort my feelings out." Jacob swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to pull over, to turn around, to scream. But he kept driving. Chloe sounded less convinced. "And did it help?" "I don't know. It reminded me of who I used to be, I guess. Before all of this. Before Jacob." Her voice wavered. "I don't want to hurt him. I really don't. But I can't ignore how I feel either. I need time to think. Space to figure things out." Chloe let out a breath. "You need to tell him." "I can't." "Not yet," Hannah said quickly. "It'll destroy him. And maybe it's just a phase, something I'll move past. I don't want to throw everything away because I'm panicking." Jacob's mind was spinning. How had he gone from planning a sweet, playful surprise to discovering a hidden fracture in their relationship. He had always trusted Hannah implicitly, believed in the strength of their bond. And now he was learning, through a disguise and an overheard conversation, that she wasn't just uncertain, she was genuinely considering if she belonged in his life at all. The GPS beeped, announcing that the route would be completed in 12 minutes. The timing felt cruel. In the back seat, Chloe was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Okay. Look. I'm not judging you. You're allowed to have doubts. But you're also about to marry someone who would do literally anything for you. That's rare. And honestly, you might regret not trusting him enough to talk about this." "I know," Hannah whispered. Jacob couldn't take it anymore. His thumb tapped the screen on the dash to play music, but he didn't even notice what song came on. He just needed a buffer, something to fill the space before he completely lost control of his emotions. The car turned off the highway onto a smaller road lined with trees. The restaurant was only a few minutes away now, tucked into a quiet part of the city with a view of the lake and soft ambient lighting he had carefully chosen for a romantic dinner. He had even arranged for a violinist to play their favorite song as they entered. Now the thought made him sick. His phone buzzed in the console, an incoming call from Hannah. She was calling him, probably to check in after her flight. From the back seat, he heard her decline the call. A few seconds later, she spoke. "That was Jacob," she said. "I can't talk to him yet." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to call him back?" "I will," Hannah replied. I need to figure things out first. I can't fake being okay when I'm this confused." Jacob's jaw clenched. He pulled the car into a side street just a few blocks from the restaurant. The parking lot glimmered under the glow of warm, gold lights, the kind designed to make every evening feel like magic. Not tonight. He shifted the car into park and turned off the engine. "We're here," he said, forcing his voice to remain low and steady. The back door clicked open, and Chloe stepped out, stretching. Hannah followed more slowly, still mid-thought. "Thank you," she said to him, not realizing who was behind the wheel. As she closed the door, her phone buzzed again, this time a message. Jacob could see the text pop up on his own screen. "Reservation is at 6. Can't wait to see you. Love you." He hadn't canceled the dinner. Not yet. Some foolish part of him had hoped, even during the ride, that she'd say something, anything, to suggest this was all a momentary lapse. A rough patch. But now, watching her walk away, lost in doubt and guilt, that hope dimmed. Jacob reached for his sunglasses and took a long, steadying breath. He hadn't planned for this. Not even close. As the car door shut behind her, Hannah hesitated on the sidewalk, staring down at her phone screen with a conflicted look. Chloe had already stepped ahead, walking toward the restaurant entrance without realizing Jacob hadn't driven off yet. He remained behind the wheel, hands still frozen on the steering wheel, watching the reflection of Hannah in the side mirror. She typed a reply to his text, paused, erased it, and typed again. Finally, she sent something. His phone buzzed, and his eyes dropped to read it. "Can we rain check tonight? I'm not feeling great after the flight." Jacob stared at the message. His mouth was dry, his heart sluggish. There was no mention of seeing him. No excuse beyond that vague explanation. He watched as she put her phone away and turned to follow Chloe, her steps slow, her shoulders hunched. Her hesitation was obvious, even from behind. But she kept walking. Instead of driving away, Jacob turned off the ignition and got out of the car. He walked around the back, moving quietly, instinctively avoiding the streetlights. He didn't want a confrontation, not yet. He just needed a moment. A sliver of time to process everything that had unfolded inside the car. From the shadows across the street, he watched Hannah and Chloe approach the restaurant door. The violinist he had hired stood just inside, already playing softly, completely unaware that the scene had crumbled before it even began. Chloe opened the door and held it for Hannah, but then paused when she saw her friend was no longer following. Hannah had stopped at the threshold, looking through the glass as if the warm glow inside belonged to another world, one she was no longer certain she could enter. "Are you okay?" Chloe asked, stepping closer. Hannah didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed fixed on the elegant table for two Jacob had reserved near the window. She recognized the setup immediately: the white roses, the flickering candles, the small box wrapped in navy blue ribbon that sat in the center of the table. Jacob had always loved details. "I think I know who the driver was," Hannah said quietly. Chloe blinked. "What?" "I recognized his cologne." "I didn't realize it at first, but now." Hannah turned slowly to look back toward the street, eyes scanning the shadows. Chloe stepped beside her, confused and cautious. "Wait. Are you saying Jacob picked us up?" "I think so." The two women stood in silence as realization began to settle between them. Hannah's face shifted through shock, guilt, panic. Chloe looked toward the car, but it was empty now, the front door still ajar, the engine off. "Holy hell," Chloe muttered. "He heard everything." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. "I need to find him." Before Chloe could respond, Jacob stepped out from behind a parked SUV, walking toward them with quiet, deliberate steps. His baseball cap was gone, his sunglasses tucked into his pocket. The truth was now fully visible. Hannah froze. He didn't speak right away. He stopped a few feet from her, letting the weight of the moment stretch taut in the air. "You recognize the cologne?" he asked, voice calm but hollow. Hannah took a breath, tried to speak, then stopped. "I guess that makes two surprises tonight," he added. Chloe stepped back, her expression full of regret. "I'm gonna give you two a minute." She slipped into the restaurant without another word, leaving them alone under the soft hum of the street lamps. Hannah took a hesitant step forward. "Jacob, I..." He raised a hand gently. "Please. Don't apologize yet. Not until you're sure of what you're apologizing for." She looked down, blinking quickly. "I never meant for you to hear that. It was supposed to be a private conversation." "I know," he said. "That's why it hurts." They stood in silence again, the air between them heavy with unspoken truths. "I was trying to surprise you," he continued. "I thought it would be fun. Romantic, even. Instead, I ended up learning how far apart we actually are." "It's not like that," she said quickly, stepping closer. "Everything I said was complicated. I'm confused. I never planned to talk to Chris again, it just..." "You don't have to explain about Chris," Jacob interrupted. "Not right now. What I need to understand is this: are you still in this with me? Or are you just trying not to disappoint someone who loves you more than you're ready for?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't look away. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you. Of us. Of becoming someone I don't recognize." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. But I can't be the only one fighting for this." "I'm not trying to hurt you," she whispered. "You didn't just hurt me, Hannah. You broke something. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not beyond repair, but something's cracked now, and I don't know if it'll hold." A tear slid down her cheek. "So what do we do?" Jacob looked toward the restaurant. The violinist had paused. A waiter was removing the roses. The candles still flickered, but the table felt distant, like a relic from a different life. "I don't know," he said. "But we can't go in there pretending everything is fine. That's not fair to either of us." She nodded. "I'm going to head home," he said. "I need time. And I think you do too. Can we talk tomorrow?" "Maybe," he replied. "But only if it's the real version of you. Not the one trying to fit into my life." She reached out as if to stop him, then let her hand fall. Jacob turned and walked away, each step heavy with the weight of what had just been lost, or maybe just exposed. He didn't look back, even when he heard her softly call his name. That night, he didn't go home. He drove. No destination. No plan. Just miles of highway stretching beneath him, headlights cutting through the dark as the silence inside the car wrapped around him like a second skin. Nothing about the ride had gone the way he expected. But maybe it had revealed the truth he needed to see. Whether he was ready for it or not. Jacob didn't sleep that night. The drive out of Seattle became longer than he had intended, leading him east along the interstate with no destination in mind. By the time the sky began to lighten with the first signs of dawn, he found himself parked at a small scenic overlook just outside Leavenworth. The air was cool, the trees dense and silent. The silence felt appropriate, numb and absolute, like the space between two heartbeats after bad news. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time without moving, arms crossed against his chest, the chill in the air creeping through the cracked window. His phone buzzed multiple times, but he didn't reach for it. He knew who it was. And he wasn't ready to read any of it. Not yet. Eventually, he stepped out, stretched, and walked to the overlook railing. The valley below was quiet, mist curling around the evergreens. He tried to focus on the scenery, to breathe deeply, to ground himself in something other than the whirlwind of the previous evening. But Hannah's words wouldn't leave him. They echoed in different tones, sometimes sad, sometimes uncertain, sometimes like a quiet admission of guilt. She hadn't betrayed him in the way some people would define it, but emotionally, she had drifted somewhere he hadn't noticed. And that was the hardest part to face. He thought he had been paying attention. He thought he knew her. Now, he wasn't sure if he even knew how she really felt about the life they had been building together. Back in Seattle, Hannah was also wide awake. She sat at her kitchen table, the remains of a cold cup of tea in front of her, the apartment far too quiet. The dinner dress she had worn was now folded across the back of a chair, abandoned after she returned home early, her mind too full to even consider changing clothes properly. Her phone sat on the table, Jacob's name at the top of the messages list. She had sent 2 texts, one that night, one early in the morning. No replies. A part of her didn't expect him to answer, not after the way things had unfolded. But another part of her, the part that still held hope, had wished he would at least acknowledge her. Her fingers hovered over the phone again, debating whether to try calling. Instead, she opened her laptop. She started writing, not to him, not as an email or a message, but just writing. A document with no title, just her thoughts. For once, she didn't filter them. She admitted the things she hadn't even fully said to Chloe. The way the engagement had overwhelmed her. The pressure of stepping into Jacob's world, which often felt more like observing a high-functioning machine than being part of a relationship. The fear of becoming invisible in his success. She wasn't angry with him. She admired him deeply. She still loved him. But her doubt wasn't rooted in who he was, it was in who she feared she might become. By the afternoon, Jacob returned to Seattle. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he stopped at a small diner where they used to have Sunday breakfasts. The same old waitress was still there, and she gave him a small smile as she poured him coffee. "You look like you've been on the road all night," she said kindly. Jacob managed a faint smile. Something like that. He sat at their usual booth, the one near the window, and stared at the plate of eggs he barely touched. His phone was still quiet, still full of unread messages. He finally opened one. "Please, just let me talk to you. I owe you that much." He didn't reply. But he didn't delete it either. Back at her apartment, Hannah paced. She had considered dropping by his house, but something about that felt wrong, too sudden, too invasive. Instead, she decided to do something else. She grabbed her keys and drove to the school where she worked. It was summer, and school was out, but she had a keycard and a quiet office that had always helped her think. She sat at her desk, surrounded by the colorful posters and the bookshelf lined with titles about child psychology and emotional development. She thought about the advice she had given to so many students and their families, about honesty, communication, courage. She realized how far she had drifted from practicing it herself. Her fingers tapped against the desk. Then she opened her laptop again. This time, she started writing a letter. To Jacob. She didn't plan to send it, not yet. But she wrote as if he were sitting across from her. "You didn't do anything wrong," she began. "And that's what makes this so complicated. You gave me everything I could have asked for. But I forgot to ask myself whether I was ready to receive it. Not because I didn't love you, but because I wasn't sure I knew how to love myself in the world we were building." It took her over an hour to finish. When she finally stopped typing, she felt drained but clearer. Meanwhile, Jacob went home. The house was exactly as he had left it. Too clean. Too quiet. The smell of the candles he had lit for the evening before still lingered faintly in the air. He sat on the couch, stared at the space where he had imagined they would be sitting together, laughing over the surprise. His mind drifted back to one moment, weeks ago, when she had asked him, "Do you ever get tired of having everything figured out?" He had laughed at the time, brushed it off with a casual joke about organized chaos. But now he realized she hadn't been joking. She had been trying to say something, and he hadn't heard it. That night, Jacob finally replied to her message. "We can talk. But not today. I need time. Tomorrow evening, if you're free. My place." He hit send and stared at the screen for a long time afterward. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. He wasn't even sure what he wanted from the conversation. But for the first time in over 24 hours, the silence between them began to shift. The following evening arrived slowly, as if the day itself was reluctant to bring what had to come next. Jacob spent the afternoon cleaning the house, not out of habit, but to stay busy. Every movement felt like an attempt to control the chaos of his thoughts. He changed the sheets, vacuumed the hallway, rearranged books that were already perfectly aligned. Even the act of preparing tea, something as simple as boiling water, felt like it carried weight. The space around him had never felt so silent. By 6 o'clock, he was seated on the couch, watching the front door without really meaning to. He hadn't dressed up, but he wasn't in the same clothes from the day before either. He chose a plain navy sweater and dark jeans, something familiar, grounded. He didn't want to create distance. He wanted this to be real, no matter how hard it would be. At 6:20, a soft knock broke the stillness. Jacob stood slowly, hesitated for a second, then opened the door. Hannah stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, her hair pulled back loosely, a worn cardigan over her shoulders. Her eyes looked tired, but determined. "Hi," she said. "Hey," Jacob replied, stepping aside. "Come in." She walked in with the quiet steps of someone entering sacred ground. The house hadn't changed, and yet it felt different. She could feel the weight of her own absence in the air. They sat on opposite ends of the couch. The distance between them wasn't vast, but it felt deliberate. Neither of them reached for the tea Jacob had prepared. For a few moments, there were only the quiet sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog through the window. "I wrote something," Hannah said finally, pulling a folded paper from her bag. "I wasn't sure if I'd give it to you or read it, but I think I need to say it out loud." Jacob nodded once, slowly. Hannah unfolded the paper, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't look at him as she began to read. "I didn't come here tonight expecting to be forgiven. I came because I owed you the truth, not just about what you heard, but about the parts of me I've kept from you. I never wanted to hide anything. I think I was just afraid of admitting I was struggling. Not with us, but with me." She paused, her eyes scanning the next lines. Her voice steadied. "When we got engaged, I was happy. I was also terrified. Not because I doubted you, but because I doubted my place in your world. You're so sure of who you are, so steady, so successful. I've always admired that. But somewhere along the way, I started measuring myself against you, and I didn't like what I saw. Not because of anything you did, because of what I hadn't done. I felt like I was falling behind in a race I didn't even know I had entered." Jacob didn't interrupt. He sat still, listening with every part of himself. "I met Chris for lunch," she continued. "Not because I missed him. Not because I wanted anything from him, but because I wanted to see someone who had known me before this version of my life. Someone who reminded me of a time when I didn't feel like I was becoming someone else just to keep up. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't secretive. But it was selfish. She finally looked up. Her eyes met his. I should have talked to you. I should have said all of this before it got to that point. But I kept convincing myself I could sort it out alone. That if I ignored it long enough, the doubt would disappear. It didn't. And then I found myself in the back of your car, saying things I never thought you'd hear. Things I wasn't even sure I believed until I said them out loud. Jacob's hands rested on his knees. He didn't speak yet. He waited. I don't want to walk away from what we have, Hannah said, folding the paper in her lap. But I also don't want to stay in something I'm not fully part of. And that's the truth I needed to face. I've been scared, not of marrying you, but of losing myself in the process. And I think if we're going to move forward, I have to find myself again first. The silence that followed wasn't cold, it was solemn, heavy with thought. Jacob finally leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Thank you, he said, his voice low. For being honest. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I didn't notice you were feeling that way. I thought we were in sync. But I see now that I wasn't listening close enough. I didn't make it easy, she admitted. You always made it feel like things would just work out. And I clung to that, even when I wasn't okay. Jacob nodded, his gaze on the floor for a moment before meeting hers again. I planned that ride because I wanted to do something special, he said. I didn't expect to be blindsided by what I heard. But maybe it needed to happen. Maybe hearing the unfiltered truth was the only way I could understand how far apart we drifted. I never stopped loving you, Hannah whispered. Even when I was confused. That never changed. I believe you, he said. But love alone can't fix this. Not unless we both want to rebuild from where we actually are, not where we thought we were. I do, she said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. But I also know I need to do the work on my own. I can't promise I'm ready yet. Jacob took a deep breath. Then let's not promise anything right now. Let's give this space. Real space. And if we find our way back, we'll know it's because we chose to. Hannah nodded slowly. I'd like that. They sat for a while after that, not as a couple trying to resolve something, but as two people simply accepting the truth. There was sadness, yes, but also a strange calm. A shared understanding that, for all the confusion and pain, something honest had finally emerged. When she stood to leave, Jacob walked her to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, then turned to him one last time. I never meant to hurt you, she said again. I know, he replied. She stepped out into the cool evening air. The door closed gently behind her. Inside, Jacob exhaled and sat back down. There was no dramatic ending. No grand resolution. But something had shifted. The confession had changed everything, not just the path of their relationship, but the way they saw each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The morning after their conversation, Jacob awoke early but didn't get out of bed right away. The sunlight poured gently through the blinds, casting soft lines across the room. He stared at the ceiling, his mind still looping through fragments of Hannah's confession. Nothing about it had been easy to hear, but now that the initial sting had dulled, he could feel a quiet clarity emerging. It wasn't closure, but it was the beginning of understanding. He got up slowly, moved through the house as if adjusting to its silence all over again. There was no tension this time, just emptiness, and an awareness of what used to fill it. Later that day, Jacob met with Marcus at their usual coffee spot downtown. Marcus had been waiting for updates, his curiosity piqued since the moment Jacob had asked to borrow his Uber profile. Man, you really went through with it, Marcus said, sipping his drink. So how did it go? Jacob let out a short laugh, one without amusement. It went sideways. I found out more than I ever wanted to. You serious? Jacob nodded, then explained in measured detail. He left nothing out: Hannah's doubts, the conversation with Chloe, the confession the next day. By the end, Marcus was staring at him, stunned. "I don't even know what to say," Marcus finally murmured. "That's heavy." "It is," Jacob said. "But I needed to hear it. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She just didn't know how to talk about it. Still, that's a hell of a thing to stumble on because of a prank." "I wasn't trying to prank her," Jacob corrected. "It was supposed to be thoughtful." "Yeah. It turned into something else." Jacob nodded and took a sip of his now cold coffee. "She's taking space. Said she needs time to figure out who she is outside of all this." "And you?" "I don't know. I'm giving her space, but it's not just for her. I need it too." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You think this is the end?" "I think it's a pause. Whether it turns into an ending or something new, that's still up in the air." Jacob's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down. Another message. But this time, it wasn't from Hannah. He furrowed his brow and opened it. It was from Chloe. "Hey. I need to tell you something. Can we talk? In person?" Jacob looked up from the screen, uncertain. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "I'm not sure," Jacob said slowly. "Hannah's friend just texted. Wants to talk." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That can't be random." "I don't think it is." They left the cafe soon after, and Jacob drove to a nearby park, where Chloe had suggested meeting. The place was familiar. He and Hannah had walked there dozens of times. The shade of the trees and the soft rustle of the breeze made it a comforting location, but today, Jacob felt none of that calm. Chloe was already seated on a bench, arms crossed tightly as she waited. When she saw him, she stood, not smiling. "Thanks for coming," she said. Jacob nodded cautiously. "What's going on?" Chloe gestured for him to sit. "I owe you an apology," she began. "For what you heard in the car. And maybe for what I didn't do sooner." "You don't need to apologize," Jacob replied. "You were just talking with your friend." "No," Chloe said firmly. "I mean, yes, but I could have done more. When Hannah started expressing doubts weeks ago, I told her she needed to talk to you. I kept pushing her to be honest. But she wouldn't. She was scared, confused. I tried to support her, but I should have insisted." Jacob studied her face. She looked genuinely troubled, as if the events had weighed on her as well. "Honestly," Chloe continued, "I didn't expect you to be in that car. None of us did. But maybe it was the only way things were going to come to the surface." Jacob exhaled slowly. "I'm not mad at you. You were being a friend. I know. But I've also seen what Hannah's like when she's overwhelmed. And right now, she's not thinking clearly. She's blaming herself for everything, and I think she believes she ruined something she can't fix." "Maybe she did," Jacob said, not out of bitterness, but quiet resignation. Chloe shook her head. "Or maybe she just needs to know that she hasn't burned every bridge." There was a pause. "She's in therapy now," Chloe added. "She signed up last week, finally. Said she wanted to understand why she shuts down instead of speaking up. Why she freezes when things get serious." Jacob turned toward the open space of the park. A couple walked by, hand in hand, laughing softly. For a second, he remembered a time when he and Hannah had walked that same path, carefree and sure of each other. "She's trying," Chloe said gently. "Even if it doesn't look like it from the outside." Jacob nodded slowly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now." "I'm not saying you have to do anything," Chloe replied. "But I thought you should know. Because sometimes, the hardest part of all this is not knowing whether the other person still cares." Jacob met her eyes. "She still cares?" Chloe didn't hesitate. "Yes. More than she knows how to say." Later that evening, Jacob sat on his back porch, watching the sky turn from blue to amber. His thoughts were quieter now, not racing but pacing. Chloe's words lingered, not as a solution, but as a new piece in a puzzle he hadn't yet completed. He opened his phone again, not to message Hannah, but to scroll through old photos. Their last vacation. A birthday dinner. Silly selfies taken after long walks. He wasn't searching for answers, just reminders. The real kind. The kind that weren't rehearsed or romanticized. One photo stopped him. It was of Hannah, caught mid-laugh, sitting on a picnic blanket, holding a sandwich she'd just accidentally dropped. She looked unfiltered, happy, entirely herself. Jacob stared at it for a long moment. Then, without overthinking, he sent her a message. Chloe came by. Thanks for being honest. I hope therapy is helping. I'm still here, just giving the space you asked for. He didn't expect an immediate response. He didn't even expect a long one. But a few minutes later, his phone buzzed. It is helping. Thank you for not shutting the door. He smiled faintly and set the phone down. The conversation had shifted again. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't closure. It was something else, something that neither of them had planned for. Jacob sat on the edge of the bench in the small park near his apartment, his fingers nervously tapping on the surface of his phone. The quiet murmur of the city felt distant, a muffled background to the storm brewing inside him. Since Chloe's message and the brief exchange with Hannah, his mind had been a battlefield of emotions, hope, doubt, pain, and something that felt dangerously like regret. But beneath all of that was an ache he hadn't fully allowed himself to face until now. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady the rapid beat of his heart. Pretending to be an Uber driver had been meant as a joyful surprise, a playful way to reconnect and remind Hannah why they fell in love. Instead, it had pulled back the curtain on hidden fears, buried insecurities, and unspoken doubts that neither of them had dared to admit. It was like peeling an onion, layer after layer, each one making his eyes sting. Jacob wasn't a man who often lost control of his emotions. His years as an entrepreneur had taught him to compartmentalize, to stay focused on the task at hand, to push past discomfort. But this was different. This was raw. And he was struggling to keep his mask intact. A notification buzzed on his phone. Another message from Hannah. He hesitated before opening it. Can we talk tomorrow? I want to try. His throat tightened. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. He typed back quickly. Tomorrow. My place. 7 o'clock. He set the phone down and ran his hands through his hair, feeling the tension knot up his scalp. 7 o'clock would come faster than he wanted. That evening, Jacob found himself restless. He wandered through his apartment, flipping on lights, checking the time repeatedly. The house was too quiet, the silence pressing against him like a physical weight. He poured himself a glass of water and stared out the window at the city lights, wondering what Hannah was doing at that moment. Was she thinking about him? About the conversation they'd had? Or was she still tangled in the confusion that had haunted her? He shook his head, trying to push the questions away. They were useless without answers. When the clock finally struck 7, Jacob paced to the door, smoothing his shirt nervously. He heard a soft knock and opened it to find Hannah standing there, her expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. She was dressed simply, but there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. Hey, Jacob said, stepping aside. Hey, she replied, stepping in. They sat down opposite each other, the distance between them filled with tension and unspoken feelings. Jacob reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin. I'm glad you came, he said softly. Me too, Hannah answered. I don't want to lose what we have. But I don't know how to fix it. Jacob nodded. Neither do I. But maybe we don't have to fix it all at once. They talked for hours, about fears, hopes, the things they hadn't said before. Hannah opened up about her insecurities, her struggle to find herself in the shadow of Jacob's success. Jacob shared his own vulnerabilities, his fear of losing her, and the loneliness he felt despite everything. There were moments of silence, tears, and laughter, real, unguarded moments that reminded them of the connection they once shared. It was messy and imperfect, but it was honest. As the night wore on, Jacob realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was enough for now. When Hannah finally stood to leave, Jacob walked her to the door. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. "Thank you for listening," she replied. They shared a quiet hug before she stepped out into the cool night air. Jacob closed the door behind her, feeling a mixture of relief and hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in weeks, he felt ready to face it. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Jacob woke up early, the room still dim in the soft light of the awakening day. His thoughts lingered on the previous night, on the vulnerability they had shared, the cracks they had revealed in their carefully constructed world. Despite the progress, the weight of uncertainty pressed against his chest like a slow-burning ache. He reached for his phone and found no new messages from Hannah. The silence felt louder than any words could have been. He debated whether to call her, but something held him back. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the understanding that healing, real healing, couldn't be rushed. It required patience, space, and trust. Jacob dressed quickly and decided to take a walk through the city streets, hoping the rhythm of footsteps and the bustle of morning life would clear his head. As he walked, his phone buzzed. It was a call. "Hannah," he whispered, almost breathless. The screen showed her name, but he hesitated before answering. Then, with a steadying breath, he swiped and brought the call through. "Hi," she said softly, her voice fragile. "Hi," Jacob replied. "Are you okay?" There was a long pause. Then she spoke, voice trembling slightly. "Can we meet? I think we need to talk, in person." "Where?" he asked. "Anywhere but my place. Can you come to the park near my apartment?" "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Jacob hung up and headed straight for the park. The wind picked up as he walked, tugging at his jacket, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. When he arrived, he saw Hannah sitting on a bench under a canopy of trees, her figure hunched and shoulders shaking. He approached slowly, unsure whether to speak or simply sit beside her. Finally, he sat down, leaving a respectful space between them. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Hannah took a deep breath and then began to speak, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said between sobs. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen." Jacob reached out, taking her hand in his. "Hey, it's okay. You don't have to apologize." "But I do," she insisted. "I kept things from you. I thought I was protecting us, but I was only protecting myself. I was scared to face the truth." He squeezed her hand, feeling the tremble beneath his fingers. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. "Because I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of losing you. Afraid that if I said anything, everything would fall apart. And maybe I was right. Because now it feels like it already has." Jacob's throat tightened. "It doesn't have to be like that." She looked up, eyes swollen but clear. "Can it not?" "I don't know." He pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her as she cried. For a long time, they sat there in the rain, the storm mirroring the turmoil inside them. When she finally pulled away, her face was wet but calmer. "We can't pretend anymore," she said. "We need to figure out who we are, separately and together." Jacob nodded. "We will. I promise." They stayed in the park, talking quietly as the rain softened into a mist. There was no quick fix, no easy answers. But in that moment, with tears and truth shared between them, a fragile thread of hope began to form. As they parted, Jacob watched Hannah walk away, her steps lighter despite the tears. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he felt certain they would face it together. Days had passed since that rainy morning in the park, yet the weight of that conversation lingered in Jacob's mind like an echo that refused to fade. Each moment alone became an opportunity to dissect what had been said, what had been left unsaid, and the fragile truths they had finally laid bare. He had returned to the routines of his life, but the colors felt muted, as if he was moving through a haze of doubt and hope tangled together. Meanwhile, Hannah had taken a leave of absence from work. The school year was winding down, and she needed time to sort through the tangled threads of her emotions. She had begun therapy, tentatively stepping into rooms filled with vulnerability and raw reflection, where she unpacked the parts of herself she had long avoided. The sessions were challenging but necessary, each one peeling back layers of fear and expectation she hadn't realized she was carrying. One afternoon, they agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between their apartments. The space was quiet, filled with the soft hum of conversations and the scent of fresh coffee. Neither wanted the intensity of a private home or the public gaze of a bustling park. This was neutral ground. Jacob arrived first, ordering a black coffee before taking a seat by the window. He watched the door, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves he always experienced before seeing Hannah. When she entered, he noticed the way her eyes scanned the room before settling on him. She smiled softly, a gesture that made his chest ache with longing and fear. They greeted each other with a tentative hug, then settled into their seats. The conversation began slowly, circling around the mundane details of their days, the small acts of normalcy that felt like lifelines. After a moment, Jacob spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, the fear of losing yourself. Can you tell me more about that?" Hannah nodded, folding her hands around her cup. "It's hard to explain. When we first got together, I admired your drive and confidence. You seemed so certain of your path. I thought being with you would help me find my own. But instead, I felt like I was trying to fit into a mold I wasn't made for." She paused, searching his eyes. "I didn't want to disappoint you, so I pretended everything was okay. But inside, I was struggling to figure out who I really was beyond being Jacob's fiancée." Jacob listened, the ache growing deeper. "I never realized you felt that way. I thought we were building a life together, like partners." "We were," she said quietly. "But I wasn't always present. I was scared of showing you the parts of me that didn't match the picture we were painting." He reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for telling me. I want to know everything, the good and the hard." She smiled, a real smile this time, warmed by trust. "There's more. I've been thinking about my family, my past relationships, and the patterns I fall into. I've realized that I have a tendency to shut down when things get difficult instead of facing the problems head-on." Jacob nodded slowly. "That explains a lot. I've noticed you withdrawing sometimes but didn't know why." Hannah took a deep breath. "Therapy is helping me understand these patterns. It's not an overnight fix, but I'm committed to doing the work." Jacob smiled gently. "I'm here for you. Whatever you need." Their conversation shifted to hopes for the future, fears about what lay ahead, and the possibility of rebuilding something new, something grounded in honesty and mutual understanding rather than idealized expectations. Later that week, Jacob invited Hannah to join him on a walk through the city's botanical gardens. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the soft rustle of leaves. They wandered through winding paths, the world around them a vibrant contrast to the uncertainty between them. "I used to come here when I was younger," Jacob said. "It was a place to clear my head." Hannah nodded. "It feels peaceful." They stopped at a bench overlooking a small pond, the water calm and reflective. "Do you think we can find that peace again?" she asked. Jacob looked at her, his eyes steady. "I want to try. But it has to be together, with no illusions." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "No illusions. Just the truth." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the garden, they sat side by side in silence, letting the moment wash over them. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, they were willing to walk it together. The following weeks were a mixture of slow progress and quiet setbacks, as Jacob and Hannah navigated the uncharted waters of their relationship. They attended therapy sessions together occasionally, shared honest conversations that sometimes cut deeper than either expected, and made tentative plans for the future. Yet beneath the surface of their attempts lay an undeniable tension, an undercurrent of uncertainty that neither could ignore. One crisp autumn evening, Jacob invited Hannah over to his apartment for dinner. The leaves outside painted the city streets with hues of amber and crimson, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and fading summer. Jacob had prepared a simple meal: roasted vegetables, a fresh salad, and a loaf of artisan bread from the local bakery. The table was set without fanfare, but with care. As they sat down, Hannah's eyes lingered on the place settings, the unspoken weight of what was to come settling between them. Jacob took a deep breath, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. "Hannah, I've been thinking about us. About what we've been trying to do these past weeks." She nodded, her expression attentive but cautious. "I don't want to give you false hope," he said carefully. "I want to be honest with you, even if it's hard. I believe you're doing the work you need to do, and I respect that. But I also know that I deserve someone who's fully all in, someone who doesn't have doubts or second thoughts when it comes to us." Hannah's eyes glistened, but she held his gaze. "I know. I felt that too." Jacob continued. "When I pretended to be your Uber driver, it was supposed to be a surprise, a way to celebrate us. Instead, I heard things I wasn't prepared for. Things that made me question whether we're truly on the same page." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For everything." "It's not just about being sorry," Jacob replied. "It's about trust. Not just between us, but in ourselves. I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me enough to be honest from the start." Hannah looked down, tears threatening to spill. "I never meant to break your trust." "No," Jacob said firmly. "You broke it the moment you chose silence over truth. That's the real hurt." She swallowed hard. "I understand." Jacob's voice softened. "I want to be clear, I'm not giving up on us. But I'm also not willing to wait forever. You have to decide if you want this as much as I do." The room fell into a heavy silence. The ticking clock seemed louder than ever. Hannah finally spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. "I want to fix this. I want to prove to you that I can be the partner you deserve." Jacob nodded slowly. "Then we have a choice. We can keep trying, or we can walk away with respect. But it has to be honest, without holding back." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "I'm willing." He squeezed her hand gently. "Good. Because I'm not giving up either." That night, they talked for hours, about fears, hopes, the realities they faced. They acknowledged that healing would be neither quick nor easy. They admitted their mistakes and forgave each other for the pain caused. For the first time in a long while, they felt something real, a fragile, growing hope. As Hannah left that night, Jacob watched her go with a mix of relief and determination. Whatever came next, they had chosen to face it head-on, together. Jacob thought the hardest part was behind them. After their brutally honest conversation and the fragile truce they had agreed upon, he believed that the road ahead would be difficult, but at least clear. But life rarely follows the neat plans we set for it. A week after their heart-to-heart dinner, Jacob was sitting in his home office, reviewing some work emails, when his phone buzzed with an unexpected message. The sender was Chloe. He hadn't heard from her directly in days, and his first instinct was cautious curiosity. The message read, "I know you're still sorting things out with Hannah, but I thought you should hear this from me first." Below the text was a voice note. Jacob tapped play. Chloe's voice was calm but serious. "Hey Jacob, I wanted to reach out because there's something you should know, something I should have told you earlier, but I was afraid of stirring up more trouble. I encouraged Hannah to talk to you weeks ago, when I first sensed she was struggling, but she panicked and shut down. She didn't want to burden you, or maybe she was scared of what might happen if she was honest." Jacob's fingers tightened around the phone. Chloe continued, her voice softening. I never imagined you'd be the one to hear that conversation. It was never meant to come out like that, in the back of your car, unfiltered and raw. But maybe it was the wake-up call you both needed. I just want you to know that Hannah cares about you deeply. She's just scared, and I think this whole ordeal has scared her more than she lets on." The voice note ended, leaving Jacob staring at the screen. Chloe's message felt like an olive branch, a bridge thrown across a chasm of misunderstandings. It also brought with it new questions. Why hadn't Hannah told him about Chloe's advice earlier? What other conversations had happened behind the scenes that he hadn't been privy to? More importantly, what did this mean for their future? Jacob decided to reply. "Thanks for telling me. I appreciate your honesty. It helps more than you know." Chloe's response came quickly. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Sometimes it helps to hear it from someone who's been watching it all unfold. Over the next few days, Jacob found himself reflecting deeply on Chloe's words. He realized that the fracture in his relationship with Hannah was not born out of malice or neglect, but out of fear and miscommunication, something so human, yet so painful. He reached out to Hannah, suggesting they meet for coffee to talk things through, but this time, with a new perspective, one that acknowledged not just their struggles, but the unseen support and complexities behind the scenes. Their meeting was quiet but filled with understanding. Hannah admitted she had been terrified of disappointing him and that Chloe's encouragement was the push she needed to open up, even if it had taken longer than she wished. Jacob listened without judgment, realizing that sometimes love isn't just about the two people in it, it's also about the network of friends, family, and confidants who shape the journey. This unexpected twist brought a new dimension to their relationship, reminding them that healing and growth are rarely linear. It's messy, tangled, and sometimes comes from the places we least expect. Jacob felt a renewed sense of hope, not because everything was perfect, but because the truth, no matter how complicated, was finally out in the open. The weeks that followed were marked by silence between Jacob and Hannah, no harsh words, no frantic messages, only the quiet space each had asked for. It was not the breakup they had feared, but it was not the reconciliation they had hoped for either. Instead, it was a period of reflection, growth, and gradual healing, albeit on separate paths. Jacob found himself retreating from the world he had built so meticulously. The constant buzz of his startup, the meetings with investors, the relentless drive to innovate, these once fueled his passion, but now felt like distractions from a more pressing internal reckoning. He decided to take a short sabbatical, leaving his company's day-to-day operations in trusted hands. His itinerary was simple: travel, solitude, and rediscovery. His first destination was a small cabin in the mountains of Montana, far from the clamor of the city. The days passed with long hikes through forests blanketed in golden leaves, evenings by the fireplace with nothing but the crackling logs and the distant hoot of an owl. Here, Jacob confronted himself, the parts he had ignored in pursuit of success, the vulnerabilities he had masked behind a calm exterior. He journaled extensively, capturing memories of his relationship with Hannah alongside his fears about the future. Writing helped him unravel tangled emotions, giving form to the confusion and sadness that had clouded his mind. He found solace in the rawness of nature and the quiet rhythm of days unhurried by meetings or deadlines. Back in Seattle, Hannah committed herself fully to therapy. The process was grueling but enlightening. She unearthed childhood fears of abandonment, patterns of avoidance, and deep-seated insecurities that had silently shaped her relationships. Therapy gave her language for feelings she had struggled to articulate, and tools to face them with courage. She also began reconnecting with her passions outside of her relationship and career. Painting classes, volunteer work at a local community center, and long walks along the waterfront became part of her routine. These activities helped her rediscover a sense of identity that was distinctly her own, not defined by her role as Jacob's fiancée or anyone's partner. Though they did not communicate regularly, mutual friends kept each informed of small life updates. Jacob heard about Hannah's art show, a quiet but proud event celebrating her recent work. Hannah learned of Jacob's retreat to Montana and the articles praising his company's latest innovations. These distant echoes reminded them that life continued, even as they navigated their own transformations. One evening, Jacob found himself sitting in a cafe downtown, sipping coffee and watching the world move around him. His phone vibrated softly, an incoming message from a mutual friend. The note was simple: "Hannah asked about you today. She hopes you're doing well." He smiled faintly, warmth creeping into his chest. Though they were apart, the thread between them had not entirely frayed. There was still room for care, for hope. Hannah, too, felt a subtle shift. During a therapy session, she spoke about Jacob not with anger or regret, but with acceptance and gratitude. She recognized that their time apart was not an ending, but a necessary chapter in both their journeys. Neither knew if their paths would cross again in a romantic way. Both understood that love sometimes meant letting go, not as a defeat, but as an act of respect and growth. The aftermath of their revelation was not a tidy resolution but a complex, evolving story of two people learning to rebuild themselves, individually, but forever connected by the shared experience of love, loss, and hope. Months had passed since their last meaningful conversation, and the rhythms of life had carried both Jacob and Hannah through tides of change, growth, and quiet reflection. Neither had rushed back to the other, choosing instead to honor the space they had given themselves, a gift both difficult and necessary. One crisp spring afternoon, Seattle's streets buzzed with the gentle energy of renewal. Cherry blossoms adorned the sidewalks in delicate shades of pink, and the scent of fresh rain mingled with the faint aroma of brewing coffee. It was in this quietly vibrant cityscape that fate, or perhaps mere coincidence, arranged their paths to cross again. Jacob had decided to stop by a small independent bookstore nestled between a bakery and a cafe. The store was a sanctuary of calm, its wooden shelves lined with books in every genre, the air fragrant with the faint musk of aging paper. He wandered through the aisles absent-mindedly, fingers grazing the spines as he searched for something to distract his restless mind. As he turned a corner, he saw her. Hannah stood a few feet away, holding a copy of a poetry book. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she wore a soft sweater that matched the gentle light around her. For a moment, their eyes met, and the world seemed to still. Neither spoke immediately. Jacob stepped forward cautiously, the surprise and warmth of the moment pressing softly against his chest. "Hannah," he said simply. She smiled, a light that was both familiar and new. "Jacob." They moved toward each other, closing the distance with a quiet grace that spoke of shared history and unspoken forgiveness. "How have you been?" Jacob asked. "Better," she replied. "I think we both have changed a lot." He nodded. "I agree. It feels like a different chapter." They found a small bench by the window and sat down. The noise of the store faded into a gentle hum as they talked, not about the past, but about the present. Their words were careful but genuine, filled with the ease that comes when two people have faced difficult truths and emerged with respect and tact. Hannah shared stories of her recent art exhibits and the new direction her life had taken. Jacob spoke of his travels and the lessons learned from stepping back from his work. They laughed over memories, the tension between them replaced by a soft camaraderie. As the afternoon light faded into evening, Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I didn't want to miss the chance," he said, handing it to her. Hannah unwrapped it slowly, revealing a simple pendant, a delicate silver tree with roots and branches intertwined. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jacob smiled. "It's a reminder of growth, how sometimes we have to let go of old leaves to make room for new ones." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Thank you." They sat together, the moment bittersweet but peaceful. Neither knew what the future held, whether their paths would intertwine again romantically or remain as friends who had once loved deeply. But what mattered most was the journey they had shared, the surprises, the struggles, the truths unveiled in the back of an Uber car that had changed everything. They stood, ready to part once more, but this time with a gentle hug and the promise of goodwill. As Jacob walked away, he looked back once, catching Hannah's smile in the fading light. And in that smile, he saw hope, not just for them, but for the life ahead, whatever it might bring.